Welcome to this simple beginner tutorial on how to draw this beautiful rose with just an HB pencil. This video is perfect for beginner artists if you're just starting out because all we'll be needing is a simple HB pencil, nothing fancy, nothing expensive. If you want to, you can also use a blending tool to blend the petals, but that is optional. And you'll be needing a sketchbook and an eraser. So you'll want to start with a faint outline of what you want to draw. I'll make a separate video on how to get this outline. And we'll start with the center of the rose. The center of the rose is the darkest part of our drawing, as this is where the petals are densest and we've got all of those little petals in the center. So you're going to want to start off with at your pencil at a slight angle so you can't see the pencil strokes too much. Just a light shading around those areas, picking out the shadows for the most pressure with your pencil and going in with the eraser to pick out the highlights. The next part of this drawing is the innermost petals of the rose, now that we've finished with the center. Now these petals are slightly lighter than the petals that were on the inside, so we can go in with less pressure on the pencil, just applying an even coat of that graphite all across the area that we want to shade in. Don't worry if you accidentally press too hard, as you can always go in with the eraser and lift up some of that pigment and go back in and adjust it to what you wanted it to be. So we're just going around with an even coat all across those petals, just picking up on where the shadows are in our reference photo and noticing where the tips of the petals are, as this is where the highlights have been caught, and we can go in with the eraser and make sure those highlights are really vibrant and we can see the tips of the petals and bring some definition into our drawing. So you can keep going around just with the inner petals, applying an even coat of the graphite. Don't be afraid to tweak your outline if you notice any inconsistencies, as you can make it more accurate as you go along and more true to the reference photo. Okay, part 3, the outer petals. Now the outer petals are far lighter than the petals nearer the center of the rose, so you can see I'm going in with a much lighter coat with the HB pencil, applying a lot less pressure and just using the blending stub to blend that out and make sure that the pencil strokes aren't too visible and you get a nice smooth petal. Make sure to use light pressure to start with, as you can always go in and add darker shadows. So just keep applying that coat with your pencil, and if you have a blending stub you can go in and blend it out to get a soft petal. Now I have just outlined some of the petals to make the outline a bit clearer, but be careful how you outline it, just because when you add an outline it might make it look a bit more cartoony, and if it's too dark, it might be hard to rub out. So I'm just going around the rose, varying the pressure on my pencil, picking out the light and dark areas, and just shading in those different parts of the rose. Make sure to have a good look at your reference photo so you can pick out where the lightest areas are and where the darkest areas are. Often where the petals overlap, there's a slight shadow, as one petal overlays another one, and you can have a slightly darker shadow here. I've noticed that the outer edges of the petals are some of the areas where you get the darkest shadow, so you can just block in that area and blend the rest out with the blending stub, which will naturally pick up some of the pigment already on your paper to get those lighter areas across the rest of the petal. Now, when you have gone around your drawing and blended out the petals, you can lose some of the definition, maybe around the edges of the petals, but you can just go back in with your pencil and make sure it's nice and sharp, and you can make those edges maybe a little bit more prominent, making sure not to press too hard, but just adding a little bit of that definition back into your drawing. So I'm just going around the petals, varying the pressure on my pencil and maybe avoiding those areas where I want to add highlights, just so there's not too much pigment on them when I want to come back and work on them again. So just going around, repeating the same process, applying an even tone, an even layer of the pencil throughout, and avoiding some of the light areas so that when we blend it out, we get a nice smooth rose petal. Now, because we're only using an HB pencil, it's important to remember that we've kind of only got two different ways we can vary the level of shading. The first one is varying the pressure on our pencil, and the second one is by adding lots of different layers to build up those shadow tones, and maybe also coming back in with the eraser to pick out the highlights where we need them. So just keep alternating between these three different methods to bring out the definition in your drawing. Okay, so the next part of our drawing is the leaves. Now these are slightly darker than the rose, and I chose to use a slightly higher pressure on the pencil to make these areas a bit darker and make them stand out a little from the rest of the rose. So I'm just going through making sure that I know where the brightest parts of the leaves are, and I've just kind of outlined those so I know to avoid those areas. And then I'm just going through and looking at where the shadows are, where the lighter areas are, and varying this across the base of the stalk. Just going in with my eraser and varying those different tones. Now I can see where the edges of the leaf kind of curl forwards. These are some of the darkest areas, so I've just gone through with my pencil and made those areas a little darker so they're a bit more prominent against the background of the rose. So I'm just going through adding some of the darker tones in once I've added the lighter shade, and going through with the eraser and making my highlights a little bit brighter, and then going back in with my pencil and picking out some of the shadows next to the brighter highlights. So I'm just going in with some final details, blending some areas out, going in with the eraser here and there to pick out some final highlights, and then going in with a sharp pencil to just make some areas a little darker and a bit more prominent. So there we are, nearly finished with our rose drawing. Hopefully you realised what's possible with just an HB pencil, and you've made a drawing you can feel proud of. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.